In today's video, I'm going to discuss a basic introduction to 3D modeling and mastering the basics in Blender. This is going to be a part of a three-part series that I'll do. But basically, it's going to be a beginner-friendly tutorial diving into the world of 3D modeling and exploring concepts and fundamentals and techniques that you'll need to know to get started. So if you're a complete beginner or you're just looking to refresh your skills, this will walk you through the essential steps of 3D modeling using Blender. This is a powerful and a free software, so yeah, it's really amazing. So let's just jump right into it. The first thing I want to discuss is the interface of Blender and just the essential tools and panels. So, of course up here we have, the file menu, this is where you can save, things. This is the edit menu, all this good stuff up here. These are the menus you can use to change between the different interfaces. So this is the layout, you get it, right? You understand, right? But I want to discuss some of the most essential tools that you're going to need to create a model. Okay, so the first tool I want to discuss is the lasso tool, or the select tools to allow you to select an object. So I'm just going to select by pressing the left side of my mouse, if you're using a mouse, and that's going to allow me to select this object or any object. And then you can also select by doing a box select like this. And to do that, you're just going to grab your left mouse and drag it like this to do a box select. You can also do a circle select by pressing C on your keyboard, and it's going to create a circle select so that you can select that way as well. You could also do a lasso select by you can also come up here to select, and you can select it from here as well. This will allow you to select as well. The next tool I want to discuss is the cursor tool. So this will allow you to change the location of the cursor, which can be helpful when you're trying to frame a location, for selecting, selecting something. So to do that, it's going to be Shift and left mouse click, or right mouse click. Shift and right mouse click, and that's going to allow me to drag my cursor to a different location if I need to reframe something. So if I'm trying to get an object in a certain spot, maybe I don't want my object to be in the center, but I want it to be somewhere else, and so that's where the object's going to go. If I'm trying to create another object, it's going to go where my cursor's at, right? And so that can be helpful in that manner. The next tool I want to go over is the move tool, and so to do that, we're going to select, and then you can do it from here. You can select it from here, or you can press G on your keyboard, and this will allow you to move the object wherever you want it to go. Then there's also a rotation tool. You can select it from here, or you can press R on your keyboard to rotate the object. You can rotate it on the Z axis by pressing RZ like this, or you can rotate it on the Y axis by pressing RY, or the X axis by pressing RX. The next tool is the scale tool, which again you can select over here, or you can press S on your keyboard, and this is going to allow you to scale the object to the desired size that you want. You can also select it from the Z-axis, so you can scale it that way. You can scale it in this direction, you can scale it on the X-axis or the Y-axis. Some more tools that I want to discuss are the measure tool, which you can find over here, or you can press the up button on your keyboard, or you can press the space bar and then press M to access the measure tool. So measure the size of your object, or the dimensions of your object. And to cancel out of this, we can just select this, or we could select out of here to deselect. So the next few tools that are going to come in handy are the add tool, which you can find by selecting Shift A on your keyboard, and this is going to allow you to add other objects in your scene. This comes in handy when you're trying to create a complex shape and you just really need to grab something real fast. So again, just press Shift A on your keyboard, and that's going to bring up this menu, and it's going to allow you to add a cube, a plane, a cylinder, whatever you need to create the desired shape that you're trying to create. We also have an extrude tool, which allows you to extrude the shape of the mesh or the object you're trying to create. So to do that, we're going to press Tab on our keyboard, and we're going to select either, you can extrude. There's different ways to extrude. So you can extrude the region, you can extrude across the normal, there's different ways to do it. But to keep it simple, we're just going to select this face. We're going to want to change the selection, so you can do that by coming up here where it says vertices here, edges, and we're going to select face, and we're just going to select it. And you can extrude this. So like I said before, there's different ways to extrude it. So you can press E on your keyboard, and what that's going to do is allow you to create another shape in the mesh. You can also extrude by scaling it in like this. Okay, so you could create any kind of shape you're trying to get with this tool. So it's going to come in handy, for some of the more complex tools. So yeah, there's different ways to extrude. So the next few tools that will come in handy is something called Inset Faces. Okay, so to select that, or to enable that, we're going to go into edit mode by pressing Tab, and we're going to select a face, and you can access it by right clicking on your mouse, or you can just simply press I on your keyboard, and this will allow you to inset a face. So it's kind of like the extrude tool a little bit, but this comes in handy again when you're trying to create more complex shapes. This can come really in handy. Then there's also another tool called the bevel tool. So to get that, we're going to select an edge by coming up here into select mode. To select the edge or to change the selection, you can also shift click, control click, depending on how you want to select it. But we can select the edge, and this is going to allow us to create a bevel. And to create a bevel, we're going to press, if you're on a MacBook, it's Command B. If you're on a Windows, I think it might be Control B. But on a MacBook, it's Command B, and that's going to allow us to bevel the edge, which, you know, can come in handy when creating more complex shapes. And when you bevel it, you can change the segments of the bevel. And so to do that, you can either scroll with your mouse like this, you know, by simply just scrolling on the scroll wheel of your mouse. That will allow you to create more segments in the bevel. You can also adjust the bevel settings by coming down here to this little menu. It's going to pop up when you deselect everything, and there's this little menu down here, and it allows you to change the width of the bevel. You can add more segments to it, and you can change the shape of it. So this allows you to come up with some, you know, more complex shapes. Another very important tool is the loop cut tool, and this allows you to select and slice loops through the mesh, which can come in handy when you're creating you know, more you know, complex shapes. So to do that, I'm gonna press either Control R. On a MacBook, it's Control R, and that's going to allow me to enter a loop cut right here. To change the amount of loop cuts, you can scroll with your mouse wheel, and this will allow you to create more. There's also an offset edge loop cut, to where you can add 2 edge loops, and I believe that's what this might be. But this just allows you to create multiple loops within the shape, which can come in handy and can really speed up the workflow process. Then there's the knife tool. So you can find the knife tool by pressing tab on your keyboard and going into settings, on this menu over here. You can find it right here. The shortcut for that is the up arrow on your keyboard, or space bar K. That's the shortcut for it, and that will allow you to select it as well. So this allows you to cut into the shape that you're trying to create. Okay, so this just allows you to make cuts, you know, which can also come in handy as well. The next tool I want to discuss is something called the poly build tool, which really comes in handy when you're trying to retopologize a mesh like a face or a character. This really comes in handy for that. And so to enable that, we have to come over here to edit mode and just look for this little icon right here, and we're going to select an edge, and this is just going to allow us to extend another piece of geometry. This comes in handy when creating retopology on a mesh, like a character, or, you know, anything. So a great example could be this monkey head, right? If we're trying to retopologize this, this can really come in handy when using this, something like this, you know. So if we had to retopologize this, you know, it could really come in handy for that. And so what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna select that tool, and it's just going, we can start to create you know, planes within the mesh. But it really will come in handy for that. It'll allow you to you know, select and retopologize. Once again, I think it works best with planes. So we select a plane here, we scale it, and we're trying to retopologize this thing. It really will come in handy for that. And yeah, you want to grab yourself a plane, and you can select these edges, and it just allows you to you know, quickly retopologize a mesh. So, you know, this comes in handy for that if you're trying to quickly retopologize something. So just gonna move my cursor up here and try to select that. But yeah, it comes in handy when, again, trying to retopologize a mesh. The next tool I want to discuss is really cool. It's called the spin tool. And to enable that, we're going to go into tab. We're going to press tab, and this will bring up that menu, and it's located right here. You can also access it by pressing the up key on your keyboard and pressing the up key and press 0. And you know, you can press the space bar and the up key and 0, and that will enable it, or you can just simply select it from over here, and it's going to bring up these two little arrows, and this is just going to allow us to spin. This really comes in handy when creating a cylindrical type of shape, and so to do that, we're just going to select one of these plus signs, and this is just going to literally spin the mesh. So this comes in handy for creating you know, certain shapes. Okay. The next tool that really comes in handy and is very important is the smooth tool, and this allows you to flatten the angles of the selected vertices of your mesh. And so to do that, we're just going to right click and press shade smooth, and this is just going to smooth the mesh out. You can also randomize these selected vertices by pressing tab and right clicking the mouse and pressing randomize vertices, and this is just going to randomize the vertices around. So this comes in handy when you're creating certain shapes. There's also the edge slide tool, which allows you to slide an edge along a face. So to do that, we're going to select the edges here, and we're going to right click and click on edge slide, and this will allow you to slide an edge across a set of faces. Then there's also the vertex slide, and so we'll do that by selecting the vertice and right clicking and selecting slide vertices, and this is going to allow us to slide the vertices around the mesh. There's also a shrink flatten tool, which shrinks the selected vertices along their normals. And so to do that, we're going to select vertices and click on shrink flatten here. And if you only select one vertice, it works a little bit better with one, but it just allows you to pull around. It allows you to flatten or shrink a vertice. Then there's also the push and pull tool, which allows you to scale a selected element. So you can do this with edges, faces, or vertices. It might work better with edges or faces. Or it might work better with faces. But it allows you to push and pull yeah, it works better when you select 4 edges at one time. So this can come in handy as well for creating certain types of shapes. Another important tool that is very important during the workflow process is the merge vertice tool, and this allows you to merge a selection of vertices together. So let's say we have a hole in this mesh and we need to merge or connect the vertices back. So I'm just going to delete that face by pressing X. And if we had to merge vertices together to create a certain shape, we would want to do that. So to do that, you could select 2 vertices or however many you want, and you're going to right click on your mouse and come down here to merge vertices, and you can merge them by the center. You can merge them towards the cursor. You can collapse them, which will completely delete the vertices. You can merge them at first, so it's going to select the first edge or the first vertice and merge it to the second one. Or you can merge by last, or at last will select the last vertice and allow you to select it that way. Another way to access this menu is by pressing M on your keyboard, and you can select it this way. You can also merge vertices by distance, which comes in handy when you're trying to clean up a mesh or something that has like a lot of vertices. You might be afraid you have like duplicate vertices in there, so that comes in handy for that. There's also mirror vertices tool here, which allows you to mirror vertices across X axes or the Y axes or Z. There's also a split tool, which allows you to split the edges or vertices off of an object. You can also do this with the face, so you can split the face or the edge off of the object. And another way to do that is by pressing P on your keyboard, and you can separate the mesh by selection, by material, or loose paths or loose parts. So you can select it, and this will allow you to create another mesh, and this mesh will be separate from the original mesh. which can come in handy. Another very useful tool that I like to use, or that's very important, is the mirror tool. And this allows you to mirror a set of vertices over to the other side. So you can do this on the x-axis, you can mirror across the y-axis or the z-axis. But to demonstrate that, I'm going to go ahead and add a plane here, and I'm just going to create a cut in the middle of this mesh by selecting Control R on my keyboard to create a cut. Oops. And I'm going to delete this side, and I'm just going to mirror over these vertices. And you can do this across the X, you can do this across the Y or the Z axes. This might work better if you have like a whole mesh, you know. Okay, so we just did it just there. As you can see, we just mirrored it. So you can mirror it this way. It might work better actually with a whole mesh. But let's just grab another object. Let's say we wanted to mirror this plane across this cube here. Alright. And this allows you to mirror across the mesh. It might actually work better with what we had before, but this just allows you to mirror the mesh across. Now I kind of want to discuss the structure, basic structure of a mesh. I think it's important that we all as artists understand the concept of everything before trying to create something. So basic structure with meshes is everything is built from 3 basic structures. And I think by now you might know what I'm talking about, but to demonstrate that, I'm just going to grab a plane here. And basically, I think by now we all know that this is a vertice right here, this is an edge, and this is a face. And again, to select these, you can simply just select them. You could change the selection by coming up here to this little menu, and this allows you to change it. But I think by now we understand the basic structure of a mesh. But I think it's important for us to always refresh our minds with it, right? And understand the concepts of it. So the vertice is the most elementary part of the mesh. It's a position, you know, it's a single point in the 3D space, and they're represented in the 3D viewport in edit mode as small, tiny little dots. And again, I think by now you understand what they look like, but one tip that I want to say is we never want to mistake the object of origin as the vertex. It might look very similar, but it's not the same thing. And that origin is right here. Remember earlier we talked about the cursor, so we never want to mistake this right here as the vertex. This is just the cursor. So here's one right here. If I grab a cube, this would be a vertex right here. You can also find them on a circle even, these are all vertices, right here. You can find them on a sphere, they're all these just little dots, and they come in, they're just, I think by now you understand what they are. And then we have something called the edge, again, which I think is something you totally understand by now as well. But the edge is just you know, these little lines right here, and you can select them and extrude them. You can move them around, but basically an edge is always connected to two vertices by a straight line. The edges are the wires. When you see when you look at a mesh in a wireframe view. Sometimes they're usually invisible on the rendered image, but they're used to construct a face. Which brings me to my next point, the face. The face is right here. Faces are used to build the actual surface of the object. And they're usually what you see when you render a mesh. If the area doesn't contain a face, it will simply be transparent or non-existent on a rendered image. I can show you an example of that real fast by coming up here to rendered mode, and basically you know, on this plane you're going to notice that the face is you're probably not going to see it because, you know, but basically that's what's happening here, and here you can see that, you know, it's kind of hard to see that face, isn't it? Right? You know, so yeah. But faces are defined as the area between either three triangles or four quadrangles, or engons, or more engons, vertices, with an edge on every side. Sometimes faces are abbreviated to triangles, quads, and engons. So, you know, you can have a triangle face as well. You know, you might end up with that, you know, if you're creating something more, you know, complex. You might eventually end up with some triangles. So this is what a triangle would be on a face. But then sometimes you might have an engon, which, you know, sometimes engons, you know, are not good to have, but I don't want to get into that right now. You get it, you understand. That's a face. I think by now you also understand what a primitive is, which is a shape that you can add to your scene. So to grab a primitive, we're going to go and we're going to click on Shift to add a mesh. And basically a primitive is a common object type that's used in a scene as a mesh. Blender comes with a variety of different primitive shapes that you can start modeling from. You can also add primitives in edit mode at the 3D cursor. So again, to do that, we're going to select Shift A, and it's going to allow us to select a primitive. And again, these are the little shapes that you've seen me add all throughout this series here so far. But it's just these little shapes that you can add. There's a variety of them. You know, and it just allows you to start the modeling process, and it really does speed up everything. Because imagine if you had to start modeling everything, you know, from a plane. That would take a long time, right? So sometimes you might need a cylinder, you know, to start modeling something. Or you might need a cube or a sphere. You know, these shapes can really help speed up that process, you know, that modeling process, you know what I'm saying? Then sometimes you might need a cone, you know. It really just depends on what you're trying to make. But I think by now we understand what a primitive is, right? It's just a basic shape that you use to start modeling something. Okay, folks, so the next very cool tool, most important tool that I use, or that most of us use, is the modifier tool. And this allows you to modify the shape of the mesh. They're automatic operations that affect an object's geometry in a non-destructive way. With them, you can perform many effects automatically that would otherwise be a little too tedious to do, such as subdivision surfaces, and without affecting the base geometry, you know. But they work by changing how an object is displayed and rendered. but not the geometry, which you can edit directly, and I'll show you exactly how that works. So you can add several modifiers to a single object, and I'll again show you what this looks like. We can demonstrate that with this cube over here. To find the modifiers, we're going to come over here to this little wrench bar, and we're going to select add modifier, and this is going to bring up a whole menu of modifiers here. And this is probably the most coolest part of Blender, right? Is being able to just quickly get a result, right? Because imagine how long it would take to, do this stuff by yourself. Some of these tools I don't even use, but I'm going to go over the ones that really will come in handy, like the subdivision surface. All right, so I'm going to select that one, and what that's going to do is subdivide the mesh. Okay, and look what happened to our cube. The reason that happened is because we didn't have enough geometry in the cube, so it subdivided the mesh into a sphere. But what happens is when we go into edit mode, okay, you can see that the mesh is actually still a cube, because like I said before, you can edit the mesh directly without the geometry actually being affected. Okay, so what I'm going to do to give this cube the proper shape that it needs, all right, is I'm going to select the edge. Okay, and we can select you can, depending on the shape you're trying to create, but what this is going to allow us to do is it's going to allow us to smooth only the edges, okay? Because right now what it's doing is it's smoothing the entire mesh, and sometimes that can come in handy, but that may not be the desired result that we want, right, with this modifier. So remember how to bevel a mesh. We're going to press Command B, okay, on a MacBook, and that's going to allow us to create a couple bevels in here, right? And now you can see the benefit of using this tool, right? This is what really makes it cool. And we can add segments in the bevels to tighten up those edges a little bit, and that's just going to allow us to create some softer edges around the mesh. All right, so that's what the subdivision modifier does. Okay, I'll demonstrate it over here with the cylinder. Once again, I'm just going to select these edges up here. All right, let's see here. You can control here, select an entire edge here. Alright, and then I'm gonna go ahead and we can apply the subdivision surface, and again it's gonna deform the mesh, but when you go into tab mode you can fix that, right? So you can bevel the edge so that it maintains its shape, which is what we want to do. We can add more segments in here, to give it the proper shape that it needs. And this is all depending on what you're trying to create. If you're purposely trying to use this tool to smooth something, then that comes in handy, and I'll show you another example of when this really will come in handy. Alright, so let's grab that little monkey, okay? And let's say we didn't want all these weird angles on this monkey. We kind of want to smooth him out, right? We want to smooth the face of this monkey, okay? So we can sculpt on this thing, okay? We want to be able to sculpt some fine details. That's when this tool really comes in handy. But I'm going to come back over here and I'm going to select it again, and this is just going to smooth the mesh. So that's what the subdivision modifier does, okay? And then let's discuss some of the other ones, right? We have a mirror modifier as well. Okay, so there's a lot of different modifiers you can play with, and this just gives you a much quicker result so that you don't have to do this by yourself. Okay, but we also have a mirror modifier, so if I select a plane or something, okay, this is going to allow us to mirror a mesh. So you can mirror this across any object that you want. So this is what the mirror modifier does. We're going to select this plane, and it's just going to allow us to mirror the mesh across whatever other mesh we're trying to mirror it across. You can also move these modifiers in the modifier stack, which is what this is. And to do that, we can select this little box, and it's just going to allow us to drag these modifiers. And whatever modifier you put first is what it's going to do. So you want to be kind of, aware of that. But basically what you can see it doing here is it's trying to mirror this mesh, so we can kind of scale it and, move it. And this is just going to allow us to mirror a mesh across something. And in this case, we selected the plane, so it's going to mirror it across the plane. We can also mirror it in the Y direction, or we can mirror it in the Z direction. So there's a lot of things you can do with this tool. I don't want to go into too much details on these. We're going to save that for later tutorial, later video, but these are just the basics. Another way that you can smooth your mesh with the subdivision modifier is by selecting the edge, because sometimes you might only want to smooth certain parts of the mesh. And so let's say with this cube we only wanted to subdivide a certain section of this cube. And so to do that, we can obviously select the edge. But what I'm saying is another way to do this is to come over here and create a crease. Okay, this is going to allow you to create a crease in the inside of the mesh. And if you don't want to bevel the mesh, this allows you to do that. So there's this little crease bar over here, and you can increase it to 1 or however much you want. And I'm going to come over here to subdivision, and basically that's what it's doing. As you can see here, it's going to allow us to do that. And we can do that with as many vertices or edges as we want. Okay, but this comes in handy when creating something like a bullet, or depending on the type of shape you're making. As you can see, this is already starting to look like a bullet, but depending on what you're making, this can come in handy. Okay, so that just allows us to get something like this. We can also do it So another really good tool that's going to come in handy is the edge loop select, or edge loop tool, which will allow you to create extra edges in a mesh. So I'll demonstrate that. I'm going to select a cube, and I'm going to subdivide the cube. And this comes in handy when you're trying to create high poly meshes. Or if you don't want to bevel edges, this comes in handy when creating those type of shapes. When you're trying to add more support to certain shapes. So to do that, I'm just gonna create an edge, a loop cut by pressing Control R, and that's going. You can do it that way, or you can also select an edge. Just select the edge, and that will allow you to add more geometry to the mesh. So this works really good with the subdivided mesh. Yeah, so again, to add a loop cut, we're going to press Control R, and we're just going to kind of slide that, and what that's going to do is allow us to get a shape like this. And this again comes in handy with smooth meshes. And we can come over here to this modifier and we can increase the amount of subdivisions, and as you can see, this comes in handy when creating just having more control over the edge, because sometimes when you create a bevel, you don't always have control, right? So sometimes it's nice to have a little bit more control over the edge here. But this also does work with beveled edges. So if you have a beveled cube here and you need to add more geometry to that in certain spots, and it's subdivided, it works very well with this as well. So we're just going to create a loop cut, and we can drag that up, and as you can see, it's going to allow you to manually place a loop right here. And this is ultimately what the bevel tool does. It just allows you to create extra loops to give you more support around the edges. But this tool comes in handy when you're trying to just give more support to the edges, So that's what this tool does. Okay. So basically, the subdivision surface modifier demonstrates why good, clean topology is so important. As you can see in the figure, it has a drastic effect on the default cube. But once you start adding additional loops, the shape is almost no longer that way. So this allows you to control the sharpness or smoothness of a mesh. And sometimes it's nice to have that type of control over your mesh. If you're creating a certain shapes, it really allows you to have more control over what you're trying to create. So scope mode is very similar to edit mode that's used to alter the shape of a model. Scope mode uses a very different workflow though. Instead of dealing with individual elements like vertices, edges, and faces, you're dealing with an area of a model that's primarily changed using brushes. So to access this interface, we're going to come up here to sculpting, and it's going to take us into a different interface. And on the side here, you can see a whole bunch of brushes, and this is going to allow us to sculpt. Instead of selecting edges and vertices and faces, now we can manually sculpt on this mesh, and this is going to allow us to create geometry organically. It's kind of hard to see right now, so what I'm going to do is go back to that subdivision modifier, and we can subdivide it, and as you can see, we can add geometry to the mesh this way. So this is another great way to actually create a mesh. If you're making an organic mesh like a character or a face or something that has a more softer shapes, this sculpting interface will come more in handy. There's also a move tool in here, and that allows you to move the mesh around, and you can find it right here. It's called the grab tool. You can also press G on your keyboard to activate it, and just allows you to grab the mesh and move things around here. And remember earlier I told you that when you're in certain interfaces you won't be able to see the edges here. That's because we're in sculpting mode, so you won't be able to see it now, but this is just another way to make to alter the shape of a mesh, besides using vertices and edges and faces. And again, all the brushes are over here, and you can do a lot here. You can also smooth the mesh. This is how you would smooth the mesh in here. And this is just going to flatten the vertices and the faces and the edges to get a certain result. So this is another cool way to create meshes for 3D models. Okay, so now that we've covered some of the basic primitives and shapes of 3D modeling, I think it's important now that we understand something called UVs. And so UVs are basically every point in the UV map that corresponds to a vertex in a mesh. The lines joining the UVs correspond to edges in the mesh. Each face in the UV map corresponds to a mesh face. Think of a UV map as projecting the surface of your 3D model onto a 2D image. Each face of a mesh can have many UV textures, and each texture can have individual images assigned to it. When you unwrap a face to a UV texture in the UV editor, each face of the mesh is automatically assigned 4 UV coordinates. These coordinates define the way an image or texture is mapped onto the face. So to demonstrate this, I'll show you what this looks like inside of the UV editor. And to find that, we're going to come up here and select UV editing. And as you can see, what Blender has done is it has created a set of UVs inside of our editor here. Alright, and so this is what you'll use when you're creating a texture for your mesh. Okay, and so this is one face right here, one face. So basically what this is a 2D image of this 3D model. Okay, so it's going to select, every part of the mesh here. It's going to be very hard to see the edges, but it works really good with faces, But you can actually change the selection inside the UV editor by coming up here, and this will allow you to see, where things are a little bit better. You can change where things are, but that's basically that's the basics of the UV map in correlation to the 3D model. Now, as I mentioned before, UV meshes are not created with UVs automatically. Now sometimes Blender will automatically create default UVs, but these UVs are still not mapped. They may not be mapped accordingly to what your mesh looks like, so you can always edit these UVs. So to do that, the process is called unwrapping your model. So of course, we'll go into edit mode to select the mesh, and again, this will allow us to edit, UVs. So to begin, we're going to choose again the UV editing workspace, which is where we are. And this again shows you the area of the UV editor. We're in edit mode right now, so you can select a vertice, face or edge, but basically the workflow is there's many approaches to doing this. So you can mark seams on the mesh to create a separation, because right now the mesh is together, right? And in some cases we might want to optimize this UV for texturing space, or if we have multiple meshes in one, we might need a little bit more space in this this box, right? So it's important that we understand how to separate faces on a mesh to get a separate UV, because right now all these UVs are combined together, and we really want to separate the UVs. So to do that, we're going to select an edge here, and we're gonna right click and we're gonna choose mark seam, which brings me to my next point. And this is gonna allow us to mark a seam in the mesh, and this is gonna separate this part of the face from everything else. So I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna select all of these seams or this face. So I'm gonna click on mark seam, and this is going to allow us to separate this. So now if we press U, so this is basically how you unwrap a mesh. We're going to press U, and this is going to unwrap this face. Okay, and this is going to separate this face from the rest of the mesh. And as you can see now, this face has its own UV map. Okay, all right, and we can do this on the top part of this box, or this cube. But that's basically the basics of seams and how to create seams. And it just allows you to separate the mesh, separate the texture or this part of the mesh, so that it can have its own texture set. I would also like to demonstrate this process with the monkey head. So what I'm going to do is select an edge on this monkey, and it's going to create a seam on the mesh. All right, so to select the edge loop, I'm pressing Option on my keyboard and I'm right clicking the mouse, or left clicking the mouse, and this is going to allow me to select the edge loop. And let's say that I needed to separate this face, okay, this part of the monkey from the rest of the monkey as a separate UV, right? So a UV is what I'm getting ready to show you in a few seconds here, but I'm going to press I'm going to right click my mouse and I'm going to click on mark seam, and again this is going to create a seam, which is that red line, okay, around the mesh. And then I'm going to select the UV. So what it has done is it has created a UV tile or a UV island on this mesh, and this is going to allow us to separate the texture of this face from the rest of the mesh. So I'm gonna select it. Another quick way to select something is by pressing L on your keyboard, and as you can see, what has happened is it has created a separate UV island, because originally it wasn't like that. Okay, originally it was like this. Okay, I'll show you. This is how it looked before. It was just like, it was like that, right? The face was connected to the to the back of the head and all that, but now on this one we've separated the face. Okay, and so to unwrap that, we can press U on our keyboard and click on unwrap, and that's going to give us a separate UV island, and this is going to allow us to create a unique texture on this part of the mesh. And sometimes this can come in handy when you're trying to have different textures on one mesh. It can be pretty useful sometimes. So there you go. Oh, and I forgot to mention one last thing about seams. To delete a seam, because sometimes you may not want to keep the seam where it's at. So to delete it, we're going to click it again. We're going to select the edge, the seam, where the seam is at. I'm going to do an edge select here, and I'm going to right click my mouse, and I'm going to click on clear seam, and that's going to get rid of the seam. Now for some cases you may be using the unwrap calculations of a cube, cylinder, or sphere, or a regular unwrap operator to produce a good UV layout. In some cases you might want to do that, right? You might need something nice and clean, because what's going to happen with the cylinder, when we click U on this, when we try to unwrap the cylinder, what's going to happen is this. Okay, Blender's going to try to create, and this is pretty decent, right? It's not too shabby, but sometimes let's see here. I'm gonna delete this top face, because sometimes it's gonna give you a result that's not very clean, and sometimes you kind of want to have those seams because it allows you to get a nice cleaner result, you know. Let's see if I can find an example here of that. Let's see, a sphere. It's a little bit more complicated to UV a sphere, isn't it? You know, because a sphere is a more organic shape, you know, and what's going to happen is it's going to try to flatten out the sphere. And sometimes that doesn't look right, you know, on a texture, you know what I'm saying? So, well, let's go back to the cylinder real quick and show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to delete these top faces here. I'm going to delete this bottom face and this top face. I'm going to select an edge and I'm going to create a seam. And I'm going to click on U. And that's going to give us a very nice clean result when we're trying to create a texture. So if you're making a can or something that's cylindrical, you know, this can really come in handy when you're trying to lay out an image. So yeah, that's basically what it is. Just like sewing something, you know. A seam is where the end of an image or a cloth is sewn together, and unwrapping the UV is, you know, discontinuous at the seams. So think of this method as peeling an orange or skinning an animal. You can make a series of cuts in the skin, you know, and then you peel it off, right? So that's kind of what this is like. You know, it's like, yeah, it's like cutting something and then trying to sew it back together, you know what I'm saying? So you can then flatten it out and then, you know, apply some stretching, whatever you're trying to do. But folks, this is the basics of seams on a 3D model. Okay, so there you have it. Okay, folks, so that has concluded the first part of the series, the introduction to 3D modeling in Blender. And basically, you know, everything that we talked about today they're really just great time-saving techniques and practices that you can use to make your modeling process so much faster and easier. And a great way that I usually save time is by using the modeling primitives that we just discussed earlier, you know, those shapes that I showed you, and, you know, a lot of the modifiers. It just really helps speed up the process. So understanding the basics is always important, and the concepts will help make your life a lot easier when modeling. I hope you enjoyed this video and you've gained a solid foundation of 3D modeling, and you are equipped with the knowledge to embark on your own modeling projects. So go ahead and subscribe, and you stay tuned for more tutorials as we explore the advanced techniques and we tackle exciting modeling challenges. I hope to see you later, and you have a good day. Goodbye.